This is The High Road with author and registered psychotherapist, Dr. Marlene Bizub. Dr. Marlene speaks to the heart of people who need to be lifted up and get out of the muck and mire that often accompanies major life changes, such as divorce or separation. Dr. Marlene will aspire to help parents of divorce to love their children more than they hate their ex, and to learn to take the high road. So please welcome the host of The High Road, Dr. Marlene.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. You are watching Dr. Marlene and George on The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Good morning, George.
Good morning, Dr. Marlene. Great to be with you again in our time zone, morning anyway.
Yes, right. I kind of envy the people where it's already afternoon or even evening. But anyway, hey, we've got a great show today, I have to tell you. We're going to talk about, and I'm going to share, this was actually your idea to talk about this. We're going to talk about the various mental health professionals' roles in family court cases. And I'll explain to the audience that you, George, were here in Colorado for years and years and years and years, left and went to Georgia for a few years, and then came back to Colorado. And a lot of things have changed. Terminology has changed. Roles have changed. That's
I think
correct,
so.
right?
I
Yeah.
think so. And I think the role of mental health professionals has expanded over the years.
Yes. Yes. It most definitely has. And so this is going to be a fun show. It's going to be informative. If people aren't familiar with what they have in their state or jurisdiction, they need to look that up, like find out what's available in your area. But I think most of what we're going to talk about is pretty standard, but we've had some, like you said, expansion. We've had some additions. We've had changing of terminology. And so it all gets really confusing to people. What we now call a CFI, which is a child and family investigator, when I started doing this kind of work 30 years ago, that was called special advocate. And we still have special advocates, like court appointed special advocates. We have an office, a CASA office, which again is court appointed special advocates. And I think most places do have CASAs. But in Colorado, we used to call special advocates we used to call the role special advocate in all cases. Now it's a special advocate if it's a dependency and neglect case where Department of Human Services is involved, or depending on where you are, it might be called CPS, Child Protective Services. But when they're involved, then we still call it special advocate. But when it's a domestic relations case, we now call it child and family investigator. And I think there's been a change in between, even. And I don't remember now what the change in between was, but you do remember special advocates when you were here, right?
Yes, I do. And it's good to know that I'm not totally out of touch because of my sojourn in Georgia.
Right. And no, you're not. No, it just gets confusing when we change titles. And so now that's a child and family investigator. And it actually might be a little different than special advocates in dependency and neglect cases, because what a CFI does is they do an evaluation. But, and this is where we have like broken down categories or divided roles. We also have, as an evaluator, something called a PRE, and that's parental responsibilities evaluator. And so a CFI is essentially a lesser form, if you will, abbreviated form. That's a better way of putting it, abbreviated form of a PRE. So a CFI, they have a limited retainer that they can charge, which in Colorado right now is $3,250. And they are asked not to go over that amount except to go to court. They can charge more to go to court. And what a CFI usually does is they'll do an intake with each parent, mother and father, separately, and then with the child or children. And I think because their fees are limited, they usually do that intake with the children together. Whereas a PRE might do them separately, might talk to each child, let them each have their own intake appointment. Yeah, go ahead. You want to come? Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I would add the language has changed over the years from custody to parental responsibility.
Oh,
And
yes, that's a good
we
one.
we used to say custody. We now say parental responsibility, but that includes decision-making authority with regard to a child,
Mm-hmm.
and also the parenting time schedule. That's inclusive within that term, parental
Mm-hmm.
responsibility. But for those who are, if we say to somebody conversationally, oh, gee, Jane Doe or John Doe, they're in a custody fight, people know what that means
Right.
still, I think, today. And if we say, gee, they're in a parental responsibility dispute, that still may be a little confusing for people.
Yes, and that's such a good point because shortly after I started doing this kind of work, custody was removed from Colorado's statute. So the statute no longer says custody anywhere. But like you said, people know what that means, and they don't know what parental responsibilities means. And there's also, well, we can break that down too, because with parental responsibilities, as you said, there's decision making and then there's parenting time. And those are different. You might have 50-50 parenting time, but you might have sole decision making, or you might have joint decision making and parenting time that is kind of a 70-30 split, or something like that, where it's not equal.
When you undertake a parental responsibility evaluation, or what we used to call a custody evaluation,
Mhm.
what does that entail for you as a mental health professional?
Well, I'm going to go back to the CFI real quickly first and finish that because the process is essentially the same. But with a CFI, like I said, they'll talk to each parent and then probably the children together. And then they will talk to collateral sources. But usually, and when I say collateral sources, these can be professional or personal. The court, of course, is much more interested in hearing from professional sources than personal because personal are not unbiased. But this might be family members, friends, or preferably counselors, teachers, school counselors, people like that who have a professional relationship with the family. And then they will often conduct a home visit. But my experience has been, again, since the CFI retainer or fees, not just retainer, but total fees, have been limited. Most CFIs only do one home visit with each parent. So they're not going to do lots of work, if you will. A PRE, first of all, the retainer is only the retainer, and it usually starts at about 4,000 or 5,000. And the cost of the total evaluation can be 10, 15, 20 or more thousand. And people are blown away by that. But if you have a lot of issues, they're going to read all the documents you send them. whereas a CFI is probably going to limit how much material you send them to review because they just aren't given enough time. And to that point, well, let me finish that, then I'll come back to that point of not having enough time. But additionally, a PRE will talk to each child individually. They'll talk to each child numerous times, or may. They don't always, but they may. They'll talk to all the collateral sources you want them to talk to. They will possibly do psych testing or make a referral for psych testing just to make sure both parents are mentally sound. They also might ask for alcohol testing, alcohol and substance abuse evaluations, or domestic violence evaluations. They don't usually do all that themselves for two reasons. It's a conflict of interest, and they aren't usually trained in all those specific areas of substance abuse and domestic violence and all that. But a PRE will do a lot more. And I used to make 2 or 3 home visits. I actually choose not to do PREs anymore or CFIs, and we'll get into that later. But a PRE does a lot more of the same stuff that a CFI does, only they might also do psych testing, and a CFI does not typically do psych testing. They can ask for a referral for that, but it's not a given that they'll be granted that referral. Now, when I was talking about additional fees, a CFI can ask for additional fees, but I'll tell you something I've had happen in the past. I asked for additional fees. It was denied. One parent or the other did not want to spend more money. They objected. The court, for whatever reason, upheld that objection. But then when I was testifying at the final orders hearing, I had an attorney, and this happened to me 2 times in particular, because after that I learned how to nip this in the bud. But both times I had an attorney ask me, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you talk to this person? Why didn't you talk to that child more? Why didn't you review all these documents? So I would have to explain because my fees were limited. I asked for additional fees. Your client, or maybe it was the other party, but in one case it was the attorney's client who was asking why I didn't do these things, who had objected. And in this case, I loved this. The judge stepped in and said, "That's right, Mr. Attorney. I believe your client objected to her having additional fees. So you can't have it both ways. You can't limit what she does, but then criticize her for not doing all of the things that you wish she would have done." So I'll let you speak to that.
Well, and I think that people need to understand when you have conducted a parental responsibility evaluation, it will also contain recommendations
Oh,
that
yes.
you come up with. And I think that's an important part of the evaluation and kind of the bottom
Yes.
line that people want to know. Your recommendation is usually going to contain recommendations for decision-making authority and also parenting time schedules.
Yes. That's an important point, and thank you for pointing that out because the whole purpose of the evaluation is for that evaluator to, like you just said, make recommendations, and especially about parenting time. We don't always recommend decision making, although I often would, say either I thought it should be joint or should be sole, and then give my reason. But with the schedule, absolutely, the court is looking to us for a recommended schedule. And they wouldn't always just rubber stamp what we recommend. but they often would. I mean, it's a pretty high level of responsibility, because you do have judges who will think you've spent a lot more time with this family and in their world than I possibly can. So I'm going to trust your judgment and adopt what you recommend. Some judges would never just adopt what I recommended, they would tweak it in some way. And I think that's kind of their way of showing, I just want to put my mark on this too. I want you to know I'm really paying attention, and that I, maybe think this piece should be just a little bit different. Just like I said, to put their mark on it. And that's okay. I'd rather they do that than blindly just adopt what someone else comes up with no thought given.
I think the court is very sensitive to the mental health professionals' conclusions,
Yes.
and may modify them slightly. But the court looks to the mental health professional, I think, as the objective voice in the room,
Yes.
and really relies heavily on those recommendations, and will often adopt them wholesale.
Yes. Yes. They will. And, it was nice when that would happen, or is nice when that happens, because it's kind of giving you and your work a stamp of approval. But I've also learned that in family court, you can't take things personally. Like, it's not directed at you. It's, as you've explained many times to our audience, it's an attorney doing his job for his client, who is the parent.
Well, we are trained to be combative, and
Yes.
we are approaching it. Really requires a paradigm shift in the thinking to try to um, shepherd the case to a settlement as opposed to litigation. And
Yes.
we want parents to be able to co-parent. I think there's a trust issue. How can people trust each other to co-parent when they couldn't trust each other to have marital fidelity, let's say? But it's a hump that needs to be gotten over,
Mhm.
and the mental health professional's role there, I think, is invaluable. One role that you serve in that fascinates me is parent coordinator, decision maker.
Yes, yes. Well, and I know you're going to ask me this later, or I think you are. You told me you were interested to hear this. So I'm going to just disclose it right now. PCDM is my very favorite role, and there's a reason. So when you're a CFI or a PRE, and then I'll get into what a PCDM is and does and all of that. But when you're an evaluator, like I said, somebody's going to be unhappy and you're going to get attacked at the hearing. And that's why I choose not to do them. I did them for 18 years, um, and have chosen over the last 10 or 12 not to do evaluations, because you are, if you will, kind of picking a parent, or it's not total win or lose unless it's a relocation case, but you are often giving preference to one parent over the other. You might give them more parenting time. And when I say give them, I mean in the recommendation. The judge will still ultimately make the decision, but parenting time may not be equal. Our recommendation may not be for equal parenting time or joint decision making. And in those cases, then the attorney would attack a lot more. And so that's why I don't like it. Okay. There's several reasons why I do like PCDM, and it's a longer explanation. So I think let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and I'll get into what a PCDM is. How does that sound?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, awesome. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to easysense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's easysense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Before we went to break, well, let me ask you first, George, was there anything else about CFIs and PREs that you want to discuss before we move on?
Well, I just want to say that if you have a mental health professional who has spent years building credibility and reputation, such as yourself with the courts and the judges, they lean toward adopting the recommendations. I know the judge is going to expect the attorneys to try to impeach or undermine the recommendation if they're not favorable to their client. But the judges, I think, develop a sense of trust over certain mental health professionals such as yourself. And one time I had a case with you where the judge I thought would simply adopt your recommendations. He didn't. I was very surprised by that, because typically a lot of times the evaluation will precipitate a settlement. The attorney, because the attorney will often tell their client, this is Dr. So-and-so's report, and Dr. So-and-so has a lot of credibility with the court. Unless there's something that's outrageous here in this recommendation, the court is probably going to follow that. So if we can avoid that and just maybe fine tune a few things or work it out outside the court, the parties are much more likely to buy in and migrate toward the high road with each other than if it is litigated.
Yes, yes. And this is a great time to repeat your line that I love, and I'm going to steal it, that no two co-parents ever litigated, I can't even talk, litigated their way to a healthy co-parenting relationship. And that is so true.
I think that's absolutely true. And I have to ask, does the role of the mental health professional ever allow for mediation type of role?
Yes, great segue into PCDM. That's almost like we had that planned and we did not. Yes, that's essentially what the PCDM role is about. So the PC, parenting coordinator part. And I'll preface this with saying, you can be appointed in Colorado as a PC without being DM, or DM without being PC. But typically they go together. It's a joint appointment. I also had one like last year where there were two separate orders and it was for both, but they put them in two orders, an order for PC, an order for DM, which I thought was odd. I've not seen that often, and I'm not sure why they did that. But the PC part to begin with is negotiating. It's communicating back and forth between the parties, teaching them how to communicate effectively and appropriately, setting them up on apps like Talking Parents or Our Family Wizard, Civil Communicator, any of those, and educating them about how co-parenting works. And it's a 2-year appointment. And often I will find after 6 months, and I do make my clients, when I'm a PCDM, go over the handouts for the level 2 co-parenting class that I teach. I don't make them come to my class. That would be inappropriate. But I review with them the handouts from the class. And it's almost like getting the information without having to pay for the class and sit through 8 hours of class. Because when you cover it one-on-one, you can do it a lot faster than in a group of 15 or 20 people, but I educate them. I tell them what the rules or rules of thumb of co-parenting are, because most of them are rules of thumb, but they are expected patterns of behavior that our courts expect to see from parents. But they don't always know what they are. And they do things that they think sound okay, and they're not.
What types of issues do you have to decide as the decision maker role?
Yes. Well, then as a decision maker, and that's where when I've negotiated, I've educated, I've done all those things, and the parties still can't come to an agreement. That's when the DM part, the decision maker part, kicks in. And I will actually make a decision about something on which they don't agree. And so, what that entails or what that looks like, and that's a great question, because parents often have different expectations or assumptions about how that's going to work. There's a decision maker with a small d and a decision maker with a capital D. And what I mean by that is, if it's a small d decision, it's this parent's going to pick up from this parent rather than meeting halfway, or rather than that parent picking up from this, or whatever. Something like that, something relatively minor. If it's major, like what school the child is going to go to, things like that, now that's a capital D decision. If it's a small d, I'll just send it in an email, and I don't need to file it with the court. The court doesn't care which parent is picking up from which or where the parties are meeting, because I might change the location. It might have been at the police station, and the parties don't feel the need for that level of, being at a police station, which sends the wrong message to children that their parents need to be at a police station to exchange them. So we might move it when things calm down to another public place. It might be McDonald's or something like that, but another place, or it might be their houses. They'll each pick up from the other's home. But that kind of minor decision, the court doesn't need to have record of, and we don't need to file a major decision or decision with a capital D with the court. But if it's what school the child is going to go to, or something major like that, then I write it up in a document of my decision and I file it with the court. And the reason I like this role is because we do have the chance to negotiate and try to work things out. because I want your opinion, but I think parents will buy into their plan more, their parenting plan, if they created it, they decided on it, and not something that was imposed upon them.
Yeah, I think that's very true, because the alternative is to go into a room where the judge comes in and he or she listens to the evidence for maybe a couple hours, maybe 2 or 3 hours if there are a lot of witnesses, and then makes a decision and force feeds that decision. It's the nature of the beast,
Mm-hmm.
to the parties. And a lot of times the parties, if they're upset with the decision, they'll look at the attorney and say, "Oh, can we appeal? Uh, this isn't right." They're upset about it. But it brings up a question in my mind. You have years of experience with the courts and have learned to navigate the court system through those years of experience. Is there a particular training or educational program available for mental health professionals who would want to work with the courts?
Well, ironically, um, and it hurts my heart to say this, but for PCDM, there is not, other than people are welcome to work with me, and I'll be happy to kind of shepherd them through this, if you will. But we do have training for CFI, for PRE, but ironically, the one that I think we need the most, there is no specific training for PCDMs. And so I know you didn't ask for this purpose, but I am always happy to help people. I mean, there's going to be a fee involved, of course, but I'm happy. I don't know how people can learn better than from someone who has done the work. We can walk people through what this looks like and how it's done effectively and appropriately. And I will say, and this is the kind of nicest part of the DM role, is when I make a decision, that becomes an order immediately upon issuance, whether it's an email, whether it's a document filed with the court. Upon issuance, it becomes an order. Now, the parties can ask the judge to review and overturn that decision. But in the meantime, they have to follow what the decision is. And so I think that's the real beauty, is they don't have to wait 3 or 4 months or more to go to court and get an answer from the judge. In a week or two, I can review it, make a decision, and get it to the parties. And now they have their new order, and it is an order. So it's a high level of authority and responsibility, but it keeps people from having to go back to court all the time. And one last thing I'll share about this, and then I'll let you give your thoughts. But knock on wood, and I will knock on wood when I say this, but I have never been overturned by a judge. I have had parties ask for a review of the decision and potentially have it overturned, but I never have had a judge overturn a decision I made.
Well, and that's you've paid the price to gain that experience over the years.
Yes. Well, I think that the reason for that is twofold. And one, first and foremost, yes, not bragging, just saying, I have years of doing this, so I know what I'm doing. The other reason, though, I think that comes into play, to be honest, I'm just being fair here, is by the time you get in front of the judge for the judge to review it, which again is going to probably be 3 or 4 months, you've been doing it for that length of time, and the judge is likely not going to change it then. So they might think to themselves, I've never heard them say this, but they might think, well, if I had heard it when it happened, I might have done it differently or overturned it. But at this point, I'm not going to change what they're doing. Usually, what they say is, Well, it seems like over these past 3 or 4 months, it's working well. So, no, we're not going to change it because it usually is. But maybe they are to themselves thinking, well, I would have done it differently. But at this point, they're not going to change it because it's just another change.
So, for a mental health professional, it almost sounds as if some sort of a mentoring relationship would be very valuable.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what I meant by shepherding is to mentor people. And yeah, in fact, you're making my wheels turn. And I had not given much thought to this, but years ago, when I was doing evaluations, I had a group of people that I met with. There was only a few of us, but we met every month in my office to provide support to each other, review cases, get a second opinion from our colleagues, things like that. I have not put something like that together for my PCDM colleagues, but I think maybe I should. I think that would be a good idea to have us support each other, share information. We used to talk about what judges were ruling in what way on cases. I'm sure attorneys do that too.
Absolutely. And um, I just can't help but wonder, um, as far as working in the courts are concerned and how difficult that can be. Can
Mhm.
you explain a little bit more why you decided to stop doing parental evaluations?
Yes, because as a PCDM, and I just started focusing on that work and limiting my practice to that and reunification therapy, which we could touch on too. But um, as an evaluator, you aren't really working with the parents, you're evaluating. I mean, it is exactly what it says. You're going in, you're keeping your cards close, holding them close, um, not letting people know what you're thinking. You're watching, you're collecting information. You don't share a lot about what your feelings are as you go through the process. You're keeping that all really close to yourself. And then you put out this report, and it can be very damning to parents. And then you don't get to work with them, you're done. And so many times when I was doing an evaluation, I would think, oh, if I could just work with them. And I would do some of that, but that's not part of the evaluator role. And so I really embraced from early on doing the PCDM role, filling that role, because we get to work with people, we get to educate them, we get to see them grow and learn and change and evolve and become good co-parents. And I was telling a dad the other day, and it was a compliment, but I said, look how far you have come in a year. A year ago, when you were in here, you were angry. And he said, I was. And I said, he admitted it, and I said, you were not very pleasant. You were critical of the other parent, the mother in this case. And he said, I was. And I said, and look at you now. And now he is calm. He is, they cooperatively co parent. And I love to see that. Well, you don't get to see that when you're an evaluator. So, beyond merely being sick of being attacked, because that certainly comes into play too, because when you're a PCDM, you're not getting attacked to the same degree that you are when you're doing any kind of evaluation. And so I just like being able to work with the parties and really evoke change, if you will.
I see. And so that was an active choice you made to stop doing that because it felt kind of distant for you.
Yes, yes. And it's been very fulfilling and rewarding. And we'll talk more about that when we come back. We're coming up on time for another quick break here. But I'll explain more about why it's so fulfilling. And I have a little tidbit of how a um, CLR, which I'll explain what that is, and I work together well on cases. But we'll do that in a few minutes here when we come back. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll be right back.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like, it was almost instant. Like, I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Marlene and George, and you're watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. Before we went to break, we were talking about the role of PCDM, Parenting Coordinator, Decision Maker, and I explained how that role works. And a similar role, but not quite the same, in domestic relations cases is a role for an attorney. And it's actually more like the GAL role, guardian ad litem role. But in Colorado, and I don't think this was like this when you left Colorado, George, but GALs used to be in both domestic relations cases and dependency and neglect cases, or DNN cases. And then I think when you came back, we had CLRs, which is child's legal representative. And now this is an attorney role, but you didn't even know that they had made that change, correct?
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. And so I see in DR cases, so they still call it GAL in DNN cases, it's CLR in domestic relations cases, but I see the CLR role a lot like the PCDM role, except they can call witnesses at the hearing and question parties and things like that. But I'm going to share a role, a combination of roles that a CLR and I have embarked upon, I guess is a good way to put it, because I have a number of cases with this CLR right now, and we work well together. And before I go into that, before we went to break, I also mentioned that there are therapists, and especially a very specialized area of therapeutic work are reunification therapists. And that's the last kind of mental health role, if you will, that I wanted to share about today. But a reunification therapist is for when a child and or children and a parent are estranged. And it might be one child, it might be all the children, whether there's 2 or 3 or 4 or however many there are. But that's when you do reunification therapy. and you work through those things. Well, we get resistant kids. You and I've talked on here before about refuse and resist dynamics, where kids, usually teenagers, but sometimes younger kids too, resist or refuse to have parenting time with a certain parent. They just won't go, they won't get out of the car, all of that stuff. Well, this CLR and I have worked beautifully together as her being CLR and me being reunification therapist. And what she calls it, and this is a good description, but I'm not the one saying this, she came up with this. We are in good cop, bad cop roles, and we truly are. So she's the one who comes in and lays down the law and says to these kids, you are going to have to go with your parent. You don't have a choice. Because in Colorado, kids can't choose at any age whether they go or not. And as you and I have talked about before, and I think you share this opinion, the older they are, of course, depending on their reasons, the more the court's going to kind of let them get away with that, but not entirely. Would you agree?
Yes, and I think it points out again one of the admirable things that the mental health professional can bring to the case is he or she is the voice of the child in a lot of proceedings, and
Yes.
the child doesn't deserve a seat at the table in the courtroom, but they do deserve a voice. And I think the mental health professional on the case provides that voice for the children or child.
Yes. And I think that's one of the most valuable things we do. And I've had people ask me as PCDM, because I'm a parenting coordinator and decision maker, do I still talk to the children and work with the children? And I tell them, absolutely. They're the reason I'm here. And in that role, you can be the voice of the child to the court. And so I think that's an important aspect. I can't imagine a PC or PCDM not meeting with the children and working on their behalf.
No, I think
But
I wonder if you encountered this. One thing that was frustrating for me was a lot of times when the opposing party did not have a lot of confidence in himself or herself, was not very strong as a person. They would say, "Well, whatever my attorney says is fine with me." And I think
yes,
people need to understand that it is their case. It's not their attorney's case. And so sometimes they have to step up and really guide their attorney uh, to try to seek out a less uh, um, hostile way to proceed in the case than litigation.
yes, because the attorney is not going to know the needs of the children. They are most likely not going to meet the children. And all you know as an attorney about the needs of the children are what your clients tell you. And so that may not hit the mark, in meeting the needs. And that's why I think it's crucially important if people are going to be a PC or PCDM that they commit to working with the children because this is about them. If the kids weren't in the family, I wouldn't be on the case, you know.
Right, right.
So, but going back to the CLR and her being bad cop and me being good cop, she often will tell the kids and she'll be the bad guy and we get on calls with kids together. We did it this last Saturday morning with 3 kids in a case. And they were not happy with her because she said, you're going to have to go. Now, we've set some timeline parameters, we're not going to force you upon a certain date, but we've set some timeline parameters for you. And we want you to really work with Dr. Bizub and your parent, and, we're going to get this fixed. And they resisted. But what she's doing for me is preserving my rapport with them. And I think that's crucial. Somebody has to be the bad guy and tell them, you have to do this. But when that person is me, I've just ruined rapport with them. And now therapy is not going to be as effective. And so I think working in combination, and that's kind of my takeaway point here, is we all as professionals have to work in these cases together. We aren't on an island. We might each do our role, but we have to work together and we have to cooperate and form a team and be collaborative in that effort. And that can be a challenge when an attorney's job is representing their client.
Yeah, that's true. The law provides that the client has the right to outline the goals of the representation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is again uh, a frustration point for me, where the client just says, well, whatever my attorney says is fine with me. They need to be engaged in the process a whole lot more than that. The attorney's going to go away after a while, but their
Right.
relationship with their co-parent and their children is going to continue.
Yes. And that's an important aspect too, as I mentioned before, of the PCDM role, is if you think you're going to have some ongoing issues, then your attorney, like you said, will be gone. They're not going to be here 6 months from now. And I also often have attorneys, I'm curious to hear what you think about this, because I don't know that I've ever asked you this. But I have attorneys who tell me that they often wonder how families turn out 6 months or a year or 2 years later. Does that happen with you? Like you wonder about how that family turned out a couple years down the road?
We really typically don't. When we close the file at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
case, or after the hearing, the trial, the final orders hearing is
Mm-hmm.
sometimes called, we call it. Um, we move on to the next case. We're not
Right,
invested in
right.
what happens with that family. We've done the best we can do to advocate and for our clients, and to advise our clients,
Mm-hmm.
to try to get them to get on the high road, because I think it's a big statement, but I think everybody's quality of life is better when the parents
Yes.
are taking the high road. It's better for the parents. It's better for the children, certainly. So it's something that we need to aspire to.
Yes, yes. Well, and I love it because I know you aren't involved after that, but I know there's often cases where you are curious how they did a year later or how they're doing. When I'm PCDM, I love running into attorneys to be able to say, oh, you want to hear how they're doing now? Especially if I'm delivering good news, like you would not believe how well they are co parenting, and to tell the attorney they're working together beautifully. To me, that's fantastic. That's the reason we do this work.
Yeah, that would be some nice psychic income for the attorney.
Yes, yes, exactly. Exactly. Well, and often, and I think I said this, but I'll close with this. I know we're running out of time, but you may not need somebody the whole 2 years. But if they don't, I tell my parents, I'm here. If you don't need me, you're not paying for the service. But if you do need me, I'm here. And then I often don't hear from them again. And that's a beautiful thing. All right. I know we're out of time, but thank you, George, for being here. And this is Dr. Marlene and George, and you've been watching The High Road on the Dr. Marlene YouTube channel. We'll see you next week.
Tune in to The High Road with host Dr. Marlene and gain insight into how to rise above tough circumstances and learn the skills that will help you take the high road in your life, no matter what challenges might come your way, on the next episode of The High Road.